While I don't want to jinx it, it's feeling like summer might finally be over here in the Sacramento Valley. For a few days now, we've had lovely, relaxing, overcast skies with temps topping out in the 70s. The extended forecast has pleasant fall weather predicted for at least the next 7 days. And I recently took advantage of the gray skies and cool temps to transplant the fall and winter veggies I had started a month ago out into my gardens. Here's how it went. First up, I have my potatoes, which I actually put in the ground the first week of August. The plants in these beds are looking robust, just recently reaching a height where they inevitably fall over. I am wondering if they might have become just a little leggy on account of having the shade cloth up as long as I did. Even though the days become short in September, the sun is strong and can still cause a lot of damage if unfiltered. It's all really a balancing act. Still, the plants seem healthy, if a bit leggy. Some, like this one, are even starting to flower. And I'm removing them as I see them so the plants continue to focus on tuber growth as opposed to making seeds. Unfortunately, the potatoes in my back beds here aren't doing quite as well. I'm not entirely sure why. A number of the seed potatoes I planted in these beds seemingly rotted out before sprouting, and many of the plants that did emerge are honestly a bit sickly looking. Now, I'm sure I'll get some potatoes out of these beds, but I'm not expecting really all that great of a harvest out of these. The big difference between the plants in the back beds and the plants in the front beds is they were grown from organic grocery store potatoes, while the others were homegrown and saved from my spring harvest. So I'm wondering if the potatoes from the store were just older than the ones I grew, making them more prone to rotting. As they were organically grown potatoes, they shouldn't have been treated with any kind of sprout inhibitors or anything like that. But the key word, of course, there is shouldn't. My first order of business before transplanting my fall and winter veggies was to finally sow my cover crop of mustard greens in a number of my beds. Unfortunately, Fusarium wilt reared its ugly head in some of my gardens in my tomatoes over the summer. And Fusarium is a soil borne fungus that can persist in the soil for up to a decade, slowly killing sensitive plants. The mustard that I'm planting here is said to contain high concentrations of a compound that can control Fusarium and other pathogens in the soil. So here's hoping on that. Just prior to planting, I liberally applied some organic granular fertilizer to my beds. I used the citrus tone here for its higher potassium number, and I'm also of the opinion that potassium is an underrated and underappreciated garden nutrient, but honestly, any of the off the shelf granular fertilizers are fine. Use whatever is cheap. I decided to get the most tedious part of my plant out project out of the way first, which was dealing with onions. Because onion seeds are tiny, I typically sow a number of them in each starter cup. The idea being that because onions are possibly the least root sensitive vegetable plant a gardener will ever encounter, you can just tease them apart like I'm doing here prior to planting. I haven't had that much luck with bulbing onions like these in the past, so I'm not devoting too much space to them. Sacramento summers are too hot for onions, and the short amount of daylight over the winter makes getting good sized bulbs a bit of a crapshoot, even when growing short day onions, which is what I'm doing here. They're onions that are adapted to producing, under the short day conditions of fall and winter. I also have to say that the way my brain is wired, this task here is absolute hell for me. I absolutely hate dealing with things that are tiny and abundant and must be handled individually. It's kind of why I currently have a plant out front absolutely loaded with tiny chili peppers that I've been putting off harvesting, and also why I'm growing way fewer cherry tomatoes next year. Does anybody else really hate harvesting those, after a certain point? Reducing the amount of extreme tedium in my garden is a super high priority for next season. Next up, I planted my bunching onions, also known as scallions or green onions. Now, I started off separating and individually transplanting them like I did with my bulbing onions. Just planting them a little closer together because you're not really going for a bulb on these. But I quickly burned out on that and just planted them in clumps at the end of my cover crop beds, like you see here. I figure I can harvest them at some point, use the greens, and replant the bases if I want. Green onions are possibly the ultimate cut and come again crop. All right, onions accomplished. Now for the rest of it. Here I have my rutabagas, and because rutabagas and other root veggies tend to be a bit sensitive to transplant shock, they're one of the few vegetables I will start in biodegradable pots, like these peat pots here. As the root bulb grows, it will typically expand to the point of bursting the starter pot, just facilitating faster decomposition of the scraps. I usually grow turnips, but I really wanted to try something a little different this year that fills kind of a similar culinary role. Unfortunately, rutabaga take forever to yield a harvest. It's 105 days under ideal conditions, and the short days of fall and winter are far from ideal. Everything takes longer in the winter, so if you are planning your first fall and winter garden, you've got to really accommodate for light levels, and not just day length, but also with the sun being low on the horizon, shadows are more common, and that will slow down growth as well. Onto beets. In a manner similar to my rutabaga, I started these in peat pots. Beets are something that my wife and I really only like occasionally, and our 6 year old daughter, of course, won't come within 30 feet of them. So I really only need to plant a fairly small amount every year. I'm doing about a dozen total here this year. Half are golden beets, which my wife and I really prefer on account of their less earthy flavor. But I'm also growing a half a dozen Detroit Reds for some family members who have a preference for red beets. Now, if anyone has any interesting beet recipes that they really enjoy, and if they think that it might, make us want to increase our yearly beet consumption a bit, I would absolutely love to hear all about it in the comments. I put all of my slow yielding crops in this bed as I won't need it again until mid April when I plant out my tomatoes, but I did have a little space left. So, what I decided to do was plant out four of my kohlrabi starts. I'm really trying this year to give my brassicas, my kohlrabi, and broccoli a little more space than I have in the past. As I've read, overcrowding can result in kohlrabi not forming a bulbous stem, and it can also result in undersized heads with broccoli. In time for a mulch layer. Even though it's a bit more expensive, I'm using alfalfa hay this time around as my mulch. I didn't have time to test straw for herbicide contamination, and since persistent broadleaf herbicides are lethal to alfalfa, it's a fairly safe bet that this stuff won't have been treated with those chemicals. Of course, there's no guarantee this hay won't have been treated with other chemicals or that it hasn't been infected with some sort of pathogen. Unfortunately, anytime you bring an outside input into your garden that hasn't been somehow purified and sterilized, there's some risk of contamination. All right, that's one bed mostly planted out. And the last thing I'm going to do here is direct sow row spinach. For some reason, almost none of the spinach I started under my grow lights germinated. And I'm not sure if I got a bad packet of seeds or if it was simply too hot under my grow lights for spinach to germinate, but I wound up with zero starts. I bought a new packet of seeds and I'm seeing if direct sow yields anything for me. Unfortunately, I've been observing some slug activity as the weather cools, and slugs can do a tremendous amount of damage in a very short period of time, so some kind of countermeasure was of the utmost importance. I usually use some sort of iron phosphate based slug bait to keep the mollusks at bay, but as I planted out my fall gardens, there was a moderate chance of rain in the forecast, and rain ruined slug bait in short order, so I decided to give beer traps a try. As most gardeners already know, slugs are apparently slimy little booze hounds, so if you leave out bowls or trays of beer in your garden, slugs will gravitate towards that instead of your plants shuffling off the mortal coil in the process of falling in and drowning in the beer. Now, I used to be something of a slimy booze hound myself, but I gave all that nonsense up about 3 years ago, so I was a bit shocked to see how expensive even garbage quality beer is now. But luckily, I was able to make my own alcohol using yeast and sugar water for way less money than even a sixer of natty ice. I then divided up the 5 gallons or so of fermenting yeast slop amongst trays placed in my garden beds. 3 days after transplanting, everything is still alive, which is always a decent sign of things to come. And in this bed, I have kohlrabi, and my slug traps have been catching roaches, but no slugs. I'm not seeing any slug damage in my transplants, so I am still calling this a win. Everything is still doing well in the central bed that was really the focus of this video. Here's another half dozen kohlrabi. I planted way more kohlrabi this year than last, as I kind of like it a little more than broccoli, truth be told. Both red and green varieties here. And speaking of broccoli, I have three in this bed here, along with my mustard cover crop, which is just now starting to germinate. Here I have some overflow green onions and some lettuce, again, along with my mustard green cover crop. And another bed of kohlrabi, along with another direct sown row of spinach, a lone broccoli plant in an oversized container, and another handful of lettuce plants. I overseeded the starter pots and didn't really have it in me to thin them, so it will be interesting to see how these turn out. I figure I'll just thin them as I harvest them. On my patio, I have broccoli and a few extra potatoes in containers. All of my broccoli this year is a sprouting variety called De Chico. It forms both a large main head as well as an abundance of smaller florets that really extend the harvest from each plant, which is why I really like that variety. Now, once all the threat of rain has passed for a bit, I'll be applying some of this BT spray to my brassicas, just in order to get ahead of the cabbage white butterflies, whose larvae can really decimate a bed of brassicas seemingly overnight. Well, fall and winter gardens lack the kind of sexy, visually appealing, and colorful crops of a spring and summer garden. They're still a great way to keep the supply of garden fresh veggies flowing year round. In places where the climate allows for year-round gardening, of course. And I also really appreciate the fact that fall and winter gardens are fairly low maintenance, set and forget endeavors. Once the plants are in the ground, you might have to do maybe a little fertilizing and pest mitigation, but mostly you can just kick back, relax, and wait for the harvest. So that's really all I've got for now. And until next time, let's hope it all doesn't die.